What's up everyone, Tim here from Everyday Tactical Vids, and today we're going to be looking at the Schrade SCHF45. Look at that, thing is a beast. I saw this at Blade Show 2015, and my contact over at Schrade said, hey, you want to review one? So I said, absolutely. And so we'll talk about some of the specs here in the studio, give you a sense of some of the details, and then we're going to head outside and start chopping with this thing. As we start off here, let me tell you that I don't have a price right now at the time I'm filming this, but I will add the information in down below as far as the Amazon links when it does become available, and also I'll put some information right here in the video to let you know how much it costs. We're looking at 8CR13 MOV high carbon stainless steel. It's got that titanium coating on it. As far as your size, from end to end, you're going to be talking about 16.5 inches. As far as your blade, you're going to be talking about 9.5 inches of cutting power, so that's where the actual cutting edge ends. And then just about 10.5 when it comes to the total blade before you actually hit these TPE handles. Handle very comfortable, jimping up here on the top. And that's the only spot. I would call it semi-aggressive, not super aggressive there. This is a Bowie style knife. Let's look at the other side. You do have Schrade right there. And then down here it says SCHF45. And as you're looking at it, you might recognize this. This is kind of like the maybe the big brother to the SCHF28, which had a big belly on it, the big recurve on it. So yeah, those are some of the specs on this knife. I don't want to spend a ton more time here in the studio talking about it. I know everybody wants to see it in use, but let's do a quick size comparison to maybe some other knives you're familiar with. So here's the BK2 compared to this SCHF45, so not even close. Here's another Schrade. This is the well-known Schrade SCHF9, still tiny compared to that. Here's the Ontario Knife Company Rat 5, once again tiny compared to that. And this one's kind of a joke here at the end, but look at a Mora compared to that. So if you think this is a good bushcrafting knife, I would say this is going to qualify as a chopper. All right, let's get outside and start using this thing. Before we start the chopping, I want to offer just a couple quick thoughts. The first thing is about the handle. So you can see that I wouldn't say it's squared off, but it's definitely a rectangular kind of shape as opposed to being very round. When it comes to machetes, prongs, things like that, I tend to prefer something that's got a little bit more curvature. So we'll see how that feels, how that holds up. And then again, the other thing is that jimping up here, is that going to be, is that going to be helpful? Do I want jimping? Do I not want jimping? Let's test it out and start. We're going to start chopping on this pine tree behind me. We'll start with some of the branches and then work to something a little bit bigger as far as the trunk, and then we'll find something even bigger after that. Here's a real quick look at what we did. Now those are all dead branches, but the weight of the SCHF45 definitely helped in the process. You didn't have to swing too hard at all to chop those off. All right, we're going to work down on the lower section here now and chop at that. Got a tree here that's dead. It's about 7 inches across the entire diameter. I'm not going to cut the whole way through it because actually I don't want it to come down just yet, but I will chop into this for a bit. It is significantly dead, so this wood is very dry. Doesn't have any green in it, I don't suspect whatsoever. So we'll see how the 45 works on this. Here's a few thoughts when it comes to using the SCHF45 on this tree. First thing is, again, probably 6-7 inches in diameter for this tree. So unless you really needed to, I don't know why you'd be using a big chopper like this to take down a tree. You know, if you had to do one tree like that and you had to do it, then yeah, you could use this. In general, you'd be using an axe, a bigger saw. You know, if it was on your property, probably a chainsaw. So is this built for chopping this? You could, but in general, I wouldn't use it for that. It's going to be better for smaller trees, things like that, limbs. The second thing I'll say is that I did rest my thumb on the jimping during some of the chopping, and it just wasn't comfortable. So I found if I just gripped it, you know, like this, without my thumb on the jimping, it was much more comfortable. When I did have my thumb on the jimping and I was swinging, I felt like each time that jimping was kind of digging back into my thumb. With a pair of gloves, probably no problem, but with bare hands using that jimping, real aggressive swinging, I wouldn't do it. I would just keep my hand, you know, kind of wrapped around the handle as one normally would. Okay, we've got this dead tree that I cut down before, and now we're going to do some chopping of this smaller tree just to see how this works on a little bit, I wouldn't call it detail work, but a little more less aggressive work. So we'll chop through this a little bit. Say we had to break this up to make some tools, or in this case probably just firewood with this wood. Now we're up to probably about 2 inches across there. So here's the smallest piece of that wood I just chopped up. Let's see how this thing works, doing a little bit maybe finer work. And I am going to hold it like this for a little bit, and then I'll actually put my finger in the choil just to see how that feels. So that is holding on to the knife with my hand on the handle and then my thumb on the jimping there. I'm going to choke up like this, and we'll spin this around to the other side, see how this works. So that's what that looks like, and thus, despite its heft, I would say it did a pretty good job. Doing a little bit more of that fine work. Definitely easier to hold a small, like, bushcraft knife as opposed to this, to do some of that more detail-oriented work. But it definitely did the job, as you can see. I did some more chopping off camera, and I would say the SCHF45 performed well. The one thing I will mention is that, you know, keeping a cadence as you're chopping is much more effective as opposed to just kind of swinging as fast as you can and as aggressively as you can. Gets you a little bit more, builds a rhythm for you, and you're chopping in the same place as opposed to swinging and then missing the spot you're actually trying to hit. But the 45 did the job, and yeah, so far I've been quite impressed with it. One thing I wanted to mention about big choppers like this, so, you know, machetes, prongs, kukris, things like that, is that when you are chopping into the wood, just because the nature of the blade, it's so thin that it's often really going to get kind of stuck down in there, and so when you move it, you may have to kind of shake it back and forth and pry it out, as opposed to an axe. And not that an axe can never get stuck, but just the nature of the head is that, you know, it's thicker and then it becomes thinner down at the end, and so when it drives in, it's a little bit easier to remove as opposed to a big chopper like this. So it's certainly a preference thing, but that's something to keep in mind if you're interested in purchasing the SCHF45. Here's a quick look at your sheath. Nothing really to write home about. Looks like it's a pretty sturdy plastic. It's got a loop here to run your belt through, and then the blade goes in here, and then this is going to go around the handle of the blade. You do have some eyelets here, and then also some slots, so you could attach it to gear in various ways. And then let me show you what it looks like on my belt with the actual 45 in here. Here's a look at it in the sheath, and attaches nicely, as is always the case. You know, most sheaths are going to move between your two belt loops unless you have a way to secure it down here, or it's locked in on the belt. So a little bit of movement that way and this way, but no problem whatsoever for me. And then undo the hook and loop, and it is quite snug in the sheath, but there you go. Now you can take it out, and we're ready to go. Wrapping up here, let's offer you some final thoughts on the Schrade SCHF45. Overall, pretty impressed. I would say, you know, it chopped well. The major challenge I was facing was with the jimping, but when I'm chopping, regardless if I'm using this one or another one, I'm not going to hold like this when I'm doing that aggressive chopping. I'm just going to hold like this, and that was totally fine. Size of the blade, quite large, so it's not going to be, you know, this is not going to be your primary go-to, at least for me, when it comes to a survival knife or an outdoors knife. I generally like something in the 5-inch give or take range. So this is going to be like a secondary item for me. Would I take this instead of an axe? Depends on the situations I was going into, or you know, what my intended use was, basically. But it has done the job. If I have to take down, you know, 15 or 20 trees, again, I'm going to use something different than a big chopper like this. I will say a couple things, you know, for on the positive side, that I did like the choil. I was able to choke up and use that. Even just doing some of that fine work with my thumb right there, totally fine. And overall, I haven't found any major hot spots. I would say that one change I would make in the future is just adding a little bit more of a palm swell here, you know, to get a little bit more of a grip, a little bit more rounding in that handle. But overall, still it performed well. There is a lanyard hole if you want to put a lanyard on there, run that, you know, over your hand, over your wrist there, and you'll have even more control of the blade. I do want to note there is no pommel, so it just comes. It is full tang, but there's nothing sticking out here at the end, so you're not going to do any breaking or smashing, you know, using that type of method. But if you're looking to get into, you know, a larger chopper, for me again, I wouldn't call this just like a primary knife. I would call this a chopper. So this would be a good option for you to check out if you're trying to figure out, do you want to get into choppers? Do you want an axe? Do you want a saw? This is probably not going to cost you a ton of money, and it's going to perform well. There's no bells and whistles to this thing. There's not all kinds of extra features, but it's going to do, I think, what it's intended to do quite well. The coating has held up pretty well. It started to wear a little bit there. You can see, yeah, down at the bottom, you can see a tiny bit. But overall, I think quite good. And definitely some of this glitch that's on the blade is from chopping into that pine tree. There was still some pitch inside it. So I'll clean that up, and we should be good to go. Once again, we'll be looking at the Schrade SCHF45. Thanks to Schrade for sending this along for review. And thanks to you, as always, for checking out the videos here on YouTube. Please subscribe to Everyday Tactical Vids on YouTube if you've not done so already. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, check us out on Instagram and Tumblr as well. Take care.